What if I told you that the best piece of fishing advice you learned last year is the very thing keeping fish away from your hook right now? It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Today we're talking about pro tips, those game-changing secrets that sometimes do more harm than good. I'm going to show you how a single, popular piece of advice, when taken as gospel, can completely sabotage your fishing season. And by the end of this, you'll see why the angler who questions everything often outfishes the one who follows every rule. Think about the last must-do tip you tried. Did it really work every single time? Let me know down below. I'm curious. Look, we're all looking for that edge. We watch the pros on TV, we read the articles, we scroll through social media, hungry for that one trick that'll fill the live well. It's human nature to want a shortcut. The problem is, we often take these tips as universal laws. Always use a green pumpkin jig in clear water. Always fish a top water at dawn. We hear it, we believe it, and we do it without question. We do it because it worked once, or it worked for someone else, a pro with a sponsor's logo on his shirt. So we repeat it over and over, turning a tactic into a rigid, unbreakable habit. And that's where the trouble really begins. Let's talk about one of the most common pieces of advice you'll ever hear, especially for pressured bass. You got to slow down. It sounds like wisdom, right? The pros say it. Your buddy who always catches fish says it. You see a tough bite, the water is clear, the sun is high, and the first thing you do is reach for a shaky head or a drop shot and start crawling it across the bottom at a snail's pace. It's almost a reflex. You've been programmed to believe that slow is the only answer when the fish get lockjaw. But imagine this, you've been doing just that for 3 hours. The sun is beating down and you haven't had a single tick on the line. Meanwhile, you see another boat on the other side of the cove, and the guy is just chunking and winding a spinnerbait, and you see him lean back and set the hook. What gives? You're doing the right thing and he's not. This is where the pro tip becomes a mental prison. You tell yourself, well, the bite is just tough, I need to go even slower. So you slow down even more. You start counting the seconds between tiny little shakes of your rod tip. You're so focused on this one proven method that you've stopped actually fishing, you've stopped observing, you've stopped thinking. The pro tip has taken over and your instincts have been put on mute. You're no longer reacting to the conditions in front of you. You're just blindly following a rule you learned last season. That angler across the way isn't necessarily a better fisherman, but at that moment he's a smarter one. He broke the rule because the rule wasn't working. He adapted and you didn't because the pro tip told you not to. Let's get into the why of it. Fish, just like people, have different moods. They aren't always lethargic and lazy, even on tough days. Sometimes the opposite is true. High pressure and clear water can make them incredibly skittish and wary. A bait sitting in one spot for 30 seconds gives them way too much time to inspect it. They can swim up, look it over from every angle, and decide something's not right. They see the line, they sense the unnatural stillness. It's like a burglar casing a house for 10 minutes before going in. No, it's suspicious. That slow, methodical presentation you're so proud of is actually screaming, I'm a fake, to every base in the area. They're not ignoring it because they're not hungry. They're ignoring it because it's setting off all their alarm bells. Now, think back to that guy with the spinnerbait. What was he doing? He was forcing a reaction. A spinnerbait or a chatterbait or a squarebill crankbait ripped through their field of vision doesn't give them time to think. It's pure instinct. It's a flash of movement, a vibration, and it triggers a predatory response. Eat it now or it gets away. They don't have time to inspect the split rings or the line tie. It's a split-second decision. On those very same days when you're blanking with your slow presentation, a fast-moving bait can be the absolute key. It's not about convincing a fish to eat, it's about not giving them the choice to say no. The pro tip to slow down completely ignores this fundamental aspect of predatory behavior. Now hold on, am I saying you should throw away your drop shot rigs and Ned rigs? Absolutely not. The pro tip isn't a lie, it's just a half-truth. The danger is in its application. Slowing down is an incredibly effective tool, but it's a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It works best when fish are genuinely lethargic due to cold water, or when they're positioned very tightly on specific pieces of cover, and you need to keep a bait in the strike zone for an extended period. Imagine a post-frontal day in early spring. The water temperature dropped 10 degrees overnight. The baits are tucked into the thickest part of a brush pile, and they aren't going to move 2 feet to chase anything. That is the perfect scenario to soak a wacky rig right on top of their heads. In this context, the pro tip is golden. But that's the key word, context. The pro tips you see online are almost always presented without their full context. You see a pro on TV catching fish after fish by dead-sticking a Senko, and the takeaway is, dead-sticking a Senko is the key. What they don't always show you is the 2 hours they spent before that burning a crankbait to find the active school. They don't mention the specific water temperature, the time of year, or the forage base that made that technique the right choice at that exact moment. We get the solution without the full equation. And when we try to apply that solution to a different equation on our home lake, we end up with the wrong answer. That's how a good tip becomes the reason you're blanking. Another part of this is the confidence trap. You used a certain technique last year, and you had an epic day. Maybe it was that slow crawling jig. You caught your personal best on it. From that day forward, that technique is no longer just a technique. It's your confidence bait. When things get tough, it's the first thing you tie on. You're not tying it on because the conditions call for it. You're tying it on because you're seeking the comfort of past success. You're trying to recreate a memory instead of solving the puzzle in front of you. Your confidence in the tip is so strong that it blinds you to what the fish are actually telling you. And what are they telling you by not biting for 3 hours? They're screaming, "Do something different." So, how do we fix this? The first step is to demote your pro tips from unbreakable laws to useful options. Think of your fishing techniques like tools in a toolbox. You wouldn't use a hammer to turn a screw. So why would you use a slow finesse technique when the fish are chasing bait fish on the surface? Before you even make a cast, take a minute, just look around. What is the water doing? What is the wind doing? Are there birds diving? Is there bait flickering on the surface? These are the clues. The lake is giving you the context that the online video never did. Let the conditions dictate your first choice, not a memory from last season. Here's a practical strategy you can use on the water. I call it the 15-minute rule. If you are fishing a spot where you are confident there are fish and you haven't had a bite in 15 minutes, you have to change something. And I don't mean changing from a green pumpkin worm to a watermelon worm. I mean a significant change. If you're fishing slow on the bottom, pick up a rod with a fast-moving bait and make 5 casts. If you're burning a spinnerbait, slow down and pitch a jig into the thickest cover you can find. This forces you to break out of that mental rut. It keeps you from wasting an hour doing something that clearly isn't working. 15 minutes, no bites, make a real change. Picture this. It's a classic summer afternoon. You pull up to a long tapering point that you know holds fish. The pro tip in your head says, fish the deep edge slowly with a Carolina rig. So you start dragging it. 15 minutes go by. Nothing. Okay, rule in effect. You put down the rig and pick up a topwater popper. It seems crazy, right? Middle of the day, bright sun, but you make a cast towards the shallower part of the point. Pop, pop, pause. And suddenly the water explodes. You just caught a fish in a way that goes against every rule for a tough summer bite. Why did it work? Maybe a school of bass was pushing baitfish up shallow. Maybe the noise just triggered a reaction. The why doesn't matter as much as the fact that you broke the pattern and got a bite. We live in an age of information overload. There are thousands of YouTube channels, articles, and seminars all pushing the next big secret. It's easy to get caught up in it all. You learn a new knot, a new rig, a new lure modification every week. But more information isn't always better. Sometimes it just creates noise and confusion. It can lead to what I call technique paralysis, where you spend more time retying and second-guessing your choices than you do actually fishing. The best anglers I know don't have 100 tricks up their sleeve. They have about 10 or 15 things that they do really, really well, and they know exactly when and where to apply them. They've mastered the context. Another massive pitfall is taking a regional tip and trying to apply it everywhere. Let's say you watch a video about how to fish for smallmouth in the crystal clear waters of the Great Lakes. The pro is using ultralight line, tiny baits, and making super long casts. It's a killer technique for there. But then you take that exact same approach to a muddy, stump-filled reservoir in the south. You're going to spend your whole day getting snagged and breaking off. The fish in that reservoir are used to feeding in low visibility. They react to vibration and water displacement, not subtle visual cues. The pro tip was 100% correct for its location, but 100% wrong for yours. Always ask yourself, was this advice meant for a lake like mine? Your electronics are your truth tellers. They can help you break free from a failing pro tip. Let's say the tip is to fish the bank, but you've been doing that for an hour with no success. Take a look at your graph. Do you see clouds of baitfish suspended 20 feet down over 100 feet of water? Do you see big arches sitting on top of a deep brush pile 100 yards offshore? The fish are literally showing you where they are and what they're doing. They're telling you that the fish the bank rule is wrong today. Ignoring that data just because a pro told you to hug the shoreline is like ignoring your GPS and insisting on using a paper map from 1985. Trust the real-time information. Weather trumps almost any pro tip. A stable weather pattern for 3 days might make that slow bite incredible. But what if a major cold front just blew through last night? The barometer is high, the sky is clear blue, and there's a stiff north wind. The fish are going to react to that massive environmental change. They're likely to pull in super tight to cover and become inactive. Conversely, what if a storm is rolling in? The barometer is dropping, the sky is getting dark, and the wind is picking up. That can trigger a major feeding frenzy. A pro tip that worked yesterday in stable weather might be completely useless today. Fishing the conditions is always more important than fishing a memory. This seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people forget it. A tip that's deadly in the pre-spawn period might be totally worthless in the middle of summer. In the pre-spawn, bass are moving up into predictable staging areas and they're feeding heavily. A slow-rolled spinnerbait or a suspending jerkbait can be unbeatable. Try that same technique in August when the water is 90 degrees and the fish are deep and lethargic, and you'll likely struggle. You have to adapt your entire approach based on the season. That hot tip from last spring needs to be put back on the shelf until next spring. Don't let it sabotage your summer and fall fishing. Some of the best fishing days come from doing something that looks completely wrong on paper. I've seen guys catch giant bass by throwing a huge swim bait in muddy water. I've seen people catch them on a buzzbait in 40-degree water. These anglers weren't following a script. They were experimenting. They had an idea, a what-if, and they tried it. Most of the time, those crazy ideas don't work. But when they do, you don't just catch a fish. You learn something new and profound about the body of water you're on. Don't be afraid to fail. The only true failure is sticking with a pro tip that isn't working just because you're afraid to try something else and look foolish. The antidote to being locked into one pro tip is adopting a junk fishing mindset. This is what the best tournament anglers do. It doesn't mean you're using junk lures, it means you have several different rods on the deck, each with a different type of lure, and you're constantly switching it up. You might fish a stretch of bank with a jig, then turn around and fish it again with a crankbait, then again with a topwater. You're giving the fish multiple looks and trying to crack the code for that specific day. You're not married to any single idea. Your only goal is to get a bite, and once you get that bite, you can start to build a pattern. This mindset keeps you flexible and adaptive. So when you hear a new pro tip, how should you process it? Don't just accept it, cross-examine it. Ask yourself a few questions. First, what is the underlying principle? Is this tip about triggering a reaction strike, or is it about mimicking a specific type of forage? Second, what are the ideal conditions for this to work? Water temperature, clarity, time of year, type of cover. Third, what are the situations where this tip would probably fail? Thinking about the limitations of a tip is just as important as understanding its strengths. When you process advice this way, you're not just memorizing a rule, you're truly understanding a tactic. Ultimately, the best pro you can learn from is yourself. Keep a simple log of your fishing trips. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just note the date, the weather, the water temperature, and what you caught fish on. After a year or two, you'll have a personalized playbook for your specific lakes. You'll start to see patterns that no pro on YouTube could ever teach you. You'll know that on your lake, when the wind is out of the southwest in May, the bass crush a white spinnerbait on the rocky banks. That knowledge earned through your own time on the water is 1,000 times more valuable than any generic pro tip you can find online. So is that one pro tip the reason you're blanking? It very well could be if you're treating it like a command instead of a suggestion. The goal is not to collect as many tips as possible. The goal is to build a deep understanding of why fish do what they do. The tips are just potential tools to solve the puzzle. Some days you need a finesse screwdriver, and other days you need a 10-pound sledgehammer. The real skill is knowing which one to pick up. Stop being a follower of tips and start being a student of the fish. That's the one piece of advice that will never, ever lead you astray and will truly change your entire season for the better. So let's bring it all home. We've talked about how that one can't miss piece of advice, like always fish slow, can become a mental trap. It can lock you into a single approach, blinding you to what the fish and the conditions are actually telling you. The biggest twist here is that the pro tip itself isn't the enemy. The real enemy is blind faith. It's the habit of following a rule without understanding the why behind it. The moment a tip stops being a tool in your box and becomes the only tool you use, that's the moment it starts to sabotage your success. This changes everything because it puts the power back in your hands. You're no longer just a recipe follower. You're the chef. You get to decide whether to use a spinnerbait or a drop shot based on your own observations and your own instincts. It frees you up to experiment, to fail, and ultimately to learn and become a much, much better angler. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this one. If it did, do me a favor and hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next video. And now I want to hear from you. What is the one pro tip that you followed religiously only to realize it was holding you back? Drop it in the comments below. Let's start a conversation and help each other break out of these ruts. Stay smart on the water, and I'll see you in the next one.